Hello and welcome to Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. I always like to make sure that people know that our guests are also credible people that are speaking to something that they've not only studied but also experiences you've been to. So.
Most of the discord comes from just a misunderstanding.
Don't give excuse to things that you are supposed to be doing.
The truth is really finally starting to come out.
Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. Hello and welcome to Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. I'm your host, BC, and today we're going to be discussing how to build financial stability, generational wealth, and also just learning best practices to managing your funds. Joining me in the studio today is Ms. Nisha Lopez, the founder and owner of 360 Lifetime. Thank you for joining us, Nisha.
Hey, my pleasure, BC. Thank you for the invite.
Yes.
Very excited to talk about this. Oftentimes we have these conversations with our girlfriends about what's the latest movie, what's the greatest fashion, but oftentimes do we have those real conversations or those taboo conversations when it comes to finance about how do we manage our finances, what's your credit score, do you have an emergency fund? So I'm super excited to get to talk about that today and kind of shed some light on that.
Yeah, it almost seems like anytime you say credit score, people either get really nervous or they're like super excited, because I find that most of the time people don't really know where their credit score is. And I think back to when I first met you, and I remember that I was in a space where I was just like, I need to get my life together. And there were certain things that I knew that I wanted to do. I wanted to save not only for my business, but I also wanted to buy a house. And I remember coming to you, and I met you in your office, and I kind of just was like, help me, help myself.
Yes,
right?
I remember that.
And I remember you sitting me down, and the thing is, it's a lot of information, but I think, with proper guidance from people like yourself, people can actually learn how to save and get into a habit of building financial stability for now and the long term. But, I always like to make sure that my audience knows that, when I have guests on, that they're credible people who have, not just an education and background in what they do, but, a passion and desires to why you do what you do for people. So, just let us know a little bit about why you're so passionate about helping people with their finance and managing their money.
So two things you touched on, BC, was habits, and you made a decision. Oftentimes we don't get to that point where we're open enough. We feel like somebody's going to judge us, or it's just not the right timing. And so oftentimes I end up with individuals where they just had enough, they lost their job, they don't have anything, they hit rock bottom, and they're like, you know what, I'm helpless, I need your help. There is other individuals that may have a little guidance but just need direction. My passion came, I remember it just like it was yesterday, back in 2003, this is about 15 years ago. I had a gentleman, and spent about 5 years in the Air Force, and in my spare time, I help people with budgets. And he came to me, and he, similar kind of what you said, BC, hey, I'm in a position, I want to buy a house. I really just need help in this area. And this individual, he came to me and he said, look, Nisha, I'm ready. I don't even know what to do at this point. When I wake up in the morning, I'm thinking about my finances. It can affect my job. I'm just at wit's end, and I don't even know where to begin. Yeah. And I remember him telling me, he said, I was in a state of depression when it came to my finances. And he said, after you developed that budget for me, it changed my life. And so that's what I like to kind of talk about today, BC, is starting with those practical steps of developing a budget.
Yeah.
And so, I always tell people, would you open a business if you didn't know how much it costs to operate your business? Absolutely not. Yeah. In the business world, and because I come from a background of accounting and finance where I own a tax and financial firm, profit and loss statements, we've referred to that as a P&L statement, as basically what that is a statement that shows how much income you have coming in each month, how many expenses you have, how much expenses you have going out each month. And so it's, what is that bottom line after I have all of my income and my expenses? What does that look like? And so it's really the start of that as to where we say, okay, here's where I'm at realistically, and here is where I can start. Once I know where I'm at, I can really start to build that generational wealth.
First of all, I just want to say, as always, thank you for your service to, our country. But also, I actually remember that, and it's the little details. You mentioned, having that checklist, right? And it's amazing how much we don't really think about the little details. I remember you made me write down everything. You made me write down like how many times I went out to eat, what I spent on just casual things. And I think I remember telling you that I really didn't like carrying cash because I felt like I spent it and I couldn't account for it.
Right.
And, you kind of guided me through how I could actually manage down to the dollar that I spend to know whether or not, I was in a position to save for, at that time, what I was trying to do, which was buy a house as well as save money for my business. So let's backtrack a little bit and just go back to why it's important to have your financial forecast as a priority in your life. Whether you're single, you're married, business owner or not, a college student, why is it important to start thinking about those things early on?
Well, it's extremely important simply because, one, finance is one of the most stressful situations. If you look at a history of divorce, it's the number one reason why most couples divorce. And so it's really getting to those details, really getting to the bottom of it. And oftentimes when people come to me, they say, a budget? I'm not going to be able to go out. I'm not going to be able to hang out with my girlfriends. I'm not going to be able to buy this new car. And really, if you put things in perspective, you can do all of those things. I recently went to a Beyonce concert. Amazing.
Of course, always.
Such an amazing experience. But, I can tell you there are people on that stage where they didn't have an emergency fund. And so when we talk about budgeting, it's starting with those basics. Do you have an emergency fund? And so when we talk about budgeting, I don't want people to get to a habit where they're so consumed about, okay, I have to have this budget, I'm not going to be able to have fun. It's really about setting those priorities so that you can develop an emergency fund, you can have fun, and you can go out and do all of those things, whatever your goals are. But you have to start from somewhere, and it starts with, in order to build generational wealth and leave something for our kids, it starts with the basics.
So let's talk about the basics, right? And, I always like to shed light to the fact that prior to meeting you, for me, to be very transparent and honest, I did not manage my money well. I think it came from a habit of, the way I was raised back home and just always feeling like if I needed it, it was given to me. And so I really had no appreciation for money. If I got it, I spent it. If I wanted it, I bought it. And it got to a point where I just had to go, you know what? I need to be smart about my money because for me, everybody is different. For me, it was, I didn't want to feel like that person who didn't understand money and then would get old and not have anything or even understand how to save, like just putting money away. And so when I started to make money, I felt that I wasn't putting away as much as I should have. And prior to meeting you, I feel like if I would have started sooner, probably have a lot more in the bank than I do now, but since meeting you, I have been very disciplined with the way I manage my funds and, even in my relationship. But let's talk about the basics, the fundamentals of, no matter how much you're bringing in, how to start.
Good question. Good point, BC. So the first thing in starting, what you mentioned, you said, hey, if I would have started early on, my financial situation would have probably been different. But most importantly, it's about, here's where I'm at today. How do I, from this point forward, given the mistakes that I've made or the lessons that I've learned, where do I start at from here and how do I make things better? And so my goal is, as we navigate through an individual's situation, is understanding what their behaviors are, what governs what they think about money, how do they value money, what is it that they want for their family. And so starting with the basic, first and foremost, I would say, sit down.
Okay.
Write it down. What's your vision? That's extremely important. What is your vision? And, oftentimes we get sidetracked by individuals saying, hey, go out and get a college degree. Right? And then they end up with $100,000 worth of student loan debt.
Yeah.
And so it's extremely important that, we look outside of the box and we start with our mental. That's most important because when it starts here, then your thinking will control your actions. And so my first recommendation is write it down.
Write it down.
Okay.
All right.
30 day, 60 day, 90 day.
Okay. So we're going to take a quick break and we're going to talk about the 30, 60, and 90-day game plan. You're watching Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. We'll be right back. Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. Welcome back to Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. If you're just joining us, we're talking about building financial wealth, stability, and generational wealth for you and your family. And I have Mrs. Nisha Lopez in the studio with me. So before we went to break, we were kind of talking about the steps, right? So what are some of the things that you would say you did to set yourself up for financial success?
So first and foremost, BC, you have to have that 30, 60 day, and 90 plan that we talked about. You have to have that 5-year plan, that 10-year plan. Where do I see myself in the next 5 to 10 years? Oftentimes, our generation, especially with millennials, we think about what's the hottest car, what's the hottest shoes. We don't look
Keeping up with the trends.
Exactly. And so we don't look 5 to 10 years from now. And so if we start with where will I be at in the next 5 to 10 years if I do X, Y, and Z today? Because if you start in your 20s and 30s, those actions will change your life in your 40s and 50s. And I'm telling you, when I was in the Air Force, I had a mentor of mine. She said, save at least 20%. Now, at the time, I was making $1,000 a month, right? And I'm like, 20%, that's $200. Like, I don't have it. And so I can tell you this, when I started at the basics, I can't save 20, but let me start with 10%. So taking baby steps. And so I started with 10, and before you know it, by the time I got out of the Air Force, I was saving about $600. Wow. I took my, after I got out of the Air Force, I bought my first home. I was 21 years old. Wow. Now, people think owning a home is very far-fetched, but actually the average cost of a home is $188,000. So it's making those temporary sacrifices. And so at $188,000, they have loans where you can put 2.5%, 5% down. That's about $9 to 10 grand. Now think about if you made that temporary sacrifice and said, you know what, let me just stay with my parents, for this first year, instead of going out and buying the most expensive apartment or car, in that 1 year time frame, instead of spending $1,000 a month on that car, stack that up for a year, right? Save that $1,000, then you have 12 grand. Then you can put that, $8,000 or $9,000 on owning a home, have an emergency fund as well. And that's where we talk about building generational wealth. I can tell you, one of the houses that I've sold, within 5 years, I was able to walk away with $70,000, right?
That's amazing. Yeah. Wouldn't we all like to do something like that?
and really, it's not about tooting my horn. It's really about knowing that those sacrifices that we make, small, such as saving that 10%, instead of buying a new car and increasing our debt to income ratio, where our debt we're overconsumed with credit card debt. We're able to build that wealth and get $70,000 to start a business or buy real estate. And so that's some of the success that I've had, is really starting with those fundamental basics.
I think that's great. You've mentioned two things. You said first have a vision, and then you've mentioned discipline and sacrifice. I think those two things are so important to the next steps of, being financially stable and building that generational wealth. Because I think the hardest thing that people find is the discipline part. The fact that we want to keep up with the latest trends, or, you see all your friends going out to buy this or do that. But I think that's where you have to take the step back and go, you know what? Is this really in my means? Is this really in my vision?
Right.
And doing this now, what would that mean for me later?
Right.
And so that vision, the mindset, plays into having that vision to make sure that you do have the discipline, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, you bring up a good point, is it in alignment with my vision? And so if you ask yourself that question, is it in alignment with where I'm trying to go, and you are honest with yourself? If it's not in alignment with your vision, then it's not for you. And so that could be making those temporary sacrifices. It could be
say no.
Absolutely.
I can't go today.
I can't do it, but we don't want to make those temporary sacrifices. But if we can do that, definitely we can set ourselves up for success.
So let's talk about the savings part, because when you really think about it, when we look across the board here in the United States, when you're talking about saving, it could be a thing where people think economically you're not able to do it because of the way we do spend and the way our resources force us to, put money out, whether it's for insurance or taxes or things that you're paying for. So some people may not have the 10 or 20%. But then when I look at places like China, it seems like they save in abundance because of their economy and stability. And then I can go as far back as to, the continent of Africa or like my country, Nigeria, where it seems like, spending money is it's like a fashion statement. The more you have, the more you spend it, and forget about saving or, anything like that. Everything is bigger, better, and you're always trying to one up someone. So it almost seems like we don't really process or think about the aspect of how to save. So when you come from those different mindsets, how do you advise people to go, okay, this is how you start saving, especially if their background isn't one where they were used to doing that?
Right. And so, that's the hardest part, is looking at the behaviors. It's also, if you look at statistics today, 40% of poor individuals spend their money on luxury items. And over 50% of the people that you talk to, they do not have $1,000 saved in their bank account, and they're living paycheck to paycheck. So the biggest thing is, what's going to drive you? What are your driving factors? And so that would be my point there is, what are those behaviors? Is it that when I get to a point where I'm stressed out, I'm overspending, or hey, when I go to Instagram and I see those red bottoms or that purse, or I hear this music,
or Amazon,
or Amazon, just a click of a button. Nowadays we have, spending is so convenient. We can literally click a button and within hours, the item that we want to buy is at our doorstep. And so if we just think about things differently, if we change our mentality and look at, okay, what can I do that will help me buy this nice car that I want, or that will help me buy all of these nice things that I get? I think if we look at developing ways to build passive income, and when we talk about passive income, that could be through real estate, that could be through developing a product and getting money while you sleep. Passive income is doing absolutely nothing and your money is working for you. That could be through stocks, that could be through bonds, that could be through a business in which you're selling a product and you have someone else developing that product or manufacturing that product and selling it through Amazon. And so, if you're selling 100 products a day, that's money coming into your pocket. And now you can go out and buy that nice car and still also be able to, save that 20%, which is a financial expert recommends saving at least 20%, 10% for long-term, 10% for short-term. And so being able to look at those, building that passive income is extremely important. And we're not often taught, about building passive income or what it is, or building, real estate in order to get to the next level in our, to build that generational wealth that we talk about.
When do you think the conversation should start?
It should start when you actually before you even go to college, because that's where the debt begins. I've talked with individuals who built up hundreds of $1,000s worth of student loan. And so sometimes we don't know what we don't know, but you have to get to a point where when you do know, you got to start taking that action and be disciplined enough if you really want it. And that's what separates you from and so if you do what you don't enjoy doing, you'll have what others don't have, when you want it most.
Awesome.
And so,
So we're going to take another short break and we'll be back. Don't go anywhere. We're going to continue this conversation on how to build financial wealth for yourself for now and for the long term. You're watching Africa in Demand. We'll be right back. Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. Welcome back to Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. Again, we're discussing how to build financial wealth and generational wealth for the long term for you and your family. And Nisha Lopez is in the studio with us. And before we went to break, we were just kind of talking about where should the conversation start. So now let's kind of transition to, if I'm someone watching this show right now, what are some of the things that should be on my checklist? What should I start to write down to prepare to, let's say, meet with your organization, your firm, to help me with, long-term planning and short-term, actually?
Good question. So as part of that checklist, the first thing I would start with, and we talked about this earlier, is where am I at today? Okay, so that could be, what is my total income? What is my total savings? What is my total debt? Developing a plan to eliminate that debt. What is my credit score? What are my goals? Where do I see myself at in the next 5 to 10 years? And so, and more importantly, again, building that passive income. What is it? Do I want to own a business? And everybody's not cut out for business. So it could be not necessarily passive income in the sense of opening business. It could be, okay, let me speak with a financial advisor or a financial counselor who can help guide me. Oftentimes we invest in our cars, we invest in houses, but oftentimes we don't look at how much can I invest in myself, whether that's getting a financial mentor or a counselor that will hold you accountable and say, okay, look, BC, you say here's where you want it to be at in the next 30, 60, 90 days. Okay, are you here?
And those are difficult conversations.
Absolutely.
To have. I know that in the beginning, like for me, it was rough because those are the type of things you would say to me. Okay, so what was the plan, BC?
Right.
You said you wanted to do this. Where
Right.
are we now? And I think that's where people find the challenge, right? So you have people who do maybe have, savings isn't the problem, but they don't know where to invest or how to invest. Or like you said, not everybody is necessarily business minded, but they still want to be able to build generational wealth or long-term investments. How do you know where to start? When you talk about stocks and portfolios, it's something that most people don't understand. It's still things that I'm still learning, actually understanding the different types of things that I can invest in so that, as you mentioned, when I'm sleeping, my money is making money for me.
Absolutely.
So if you're a beginner, what advice would you give to someone to start?
First and foremost, we're in an internet era, right? You scroll through Instagram, you scroll through Facebook, and you can literally buy a product or you can literally research with Google. And so I would say, first and foremost, do your own research. Link up with a financial advisor, a financial counselor. I've often heard the terms, your network is your net worth. And that's so true. It's who are we surrounding ourselves with? What are we listening to on a daily basis? Oftentimes we get caught up in the commercial and the IG and, what's going on in social media. That stuff is not real. The cars you see, they're leased. Half of them are in debt paying for them. And so it's really looking at those areas and first and foremost, getting a team of people who can guide you. And more importantly, knowing your vision so that as people come about or financial advisors who say, hey, you should do this right here. This isn't in alignment with where I'm trying to go. I'm not going to put 50% of my money into the stock market because I want to buy 3 or 4 duplexes, or I want to be able to, whatever the case is, or making sure that your portfolio is diversified, and more importantly, that you're protecting your wealth. And we talk about protecting our wealth and leaving something for our loved ones, something tangible, getting a life insurance policy. If you go out, most people go out, they spend $20, $30 a week, at least just eating out. Can you imagine if you took that $35 and you can literally get a $250,000 life insurance policy for $35 a month. Can you imagine how different, your life would be, in the Black community?
Yeah.
We don't have that jump start, so there's so many barriers that are between us and building wealth from us not being taught or brought up, or us being in an environment where we didn't have, and now that we have it, we want to spend. And so oftentimes it's being looking at, okay, how can I protect my wealth? Starting off with the basis, spending $35 a month, getting a $250 life insurance policy. I'll never forget, I had 2 clients, they were in their 30s. And, when I talk to people, I'm like, I don't care if you're 20 or 30, but 30 years old, and they were involved in they were just going to the grocery store, Labor Day, involved in a very tragic accident. And it hit close to home because these were people I'm talking with every day. And so after that experience, I made it my business, whether I was talking to somebody who was 18, 19, 20, or who had a family, to say, you know what, you should spend that $20,000 or $30,000, or you should develop a will that says, God forbid, but if something happened to me today, here's my will. Here's how here's who I want my children to live with. I have a, policy that will make sure their college education, if they decide to go to college, or a business startup fund, that's taken care of. So that way we're not putting ourselves 10 steps behind because we have to get a student loan or borrow, $100,000 to start up a business. We're already setting that up for our generation. In order to build generation, it has to start from somewhere.
Why do you think that, especially, you mentioned this, within the, African American community, why do you feel that we don't put as much importance on things like life insurance? Because, you mentioned that, and it's unfortunate that something tragic has to happen for people to realize that it's so important, but it almost seems like, it's something that we just go, oh, I don't need that, I'm fine.
Right.
Why do you think the mentality is like that?
From my professional opinion, I would say we don't know what we don't know. Right? A lot of clients that I speak with, and I advise them, because at 360 Lifetime, my goal is to focus on every single aspect of your finances, from taxes to debt to savings to life insurance. We don't know what we don't know. So we don't know that, hey, it's only $30 a month to start up a life insurance policy for your family. And so oftentimes we end up having to pay for burial expenses because we haven't thought out those things or started with the basics, right? Or talking to a financial advisor that can really sit down holistically and say, hey, here's where you're at. Here are the gaps that I see within your financial life. And it's not a cookie cutter approach. Everyone's financial situation is different. Yeah. And so it's really sitting down with someone or being honest with yourself. I think that's the biggest thing, being honest with yourself about where you are and the habits that are going to keep you from reaching your goals.
It's funny, you mentioned earlier about where you could cut back. I remember one of the early things that I did was doing the math on how much I spent eating out. See, there's a difference when, you're single to then when you get married and you have 2 kids. And I actually used to eat out almost every single day. And I remember doing the math on how much I was spending eating out. And not only was I eating out every single day, lunch for the most part, but I was actually spending it at a very expensive place. Whole Foods. So I did the math, and I remember it came out to be maybe something like $700 at the end of the year, or 6 months that I was spending just doing that. And it's funny because I was like, BC, you cook your own food, take it to work with you. And that in itself is savings. But I think a lot of times people don't even know where can I cut back.
It's the little things that adds up. And believe it or not, $700 a month, that's a rental property right there that will pay, for your Whole Foods expenses. So it's just really sitting down, evaluating. And so you don't have to be on this tight budget. Always advise clients to figure out, put that 20%, let's develop a plan to pay off that debt. And we put X amount of money aside so that they don't have to look at those fine details unless, of course, they have a lot of debt or what have you. They can look at, first and foremost, having a separate account where spending comes from, not mixing that up with their bill account. I typically recommend with my clients setting up 3 accounts, one for savings, one for spending, and one for bills. And so when that paycheck or that money from the business comes in, X amount goes over here to spending. So this is your spending money. Once it's gone, that's it. And so everyone spends their money differently, whether it's shopping, eating out, what have you. So I like to help my clients get onto a plan that's going to set them up for success, where they don't feel like they're penny pinching. They can still enjoy the Whole Foods here and there, but also put things in perspective with their long-term vision.
Wanisha, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Before we go, just tell our guests how they can find out about your practice, where you are, and how they can follow or get in touch with you.
Sure, thank you. You can check us out at 360lifetime.com, www.360lifetime.com. If you're just starting out, you're not sure where to start, or hey, you're in tax trouble, you need to file back taxes, or you need help just kind of navigating through the system, or even setting up a business, definitely look us up on www.360lifetime. And BC, thank you so much for this opportunity. Is excited. We definitely have to do more
We're gonna
of getting
keep
the
this
word.
conversation going.
Yeah, we have to get this financial literacy in our community in order for us to excel as a community.
Yeah. Thank you, Nisha, as always. You guys have been watching Africa on Demand. I'd like to thank my guest, Nisha Lopez, for joining us today. And don't go anywhere. We're always going to continue these type of conversations. You're watching Africa on Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. We'll see you next time.
Zumba,